Hi everyone. Today let's talk about Netflix. Then we'll get straight into the charts. You can see Netflix going crazy here after hours. Then we'll take a look at my profits for the day and my positions going into tomorrow. If you like trading stocks and options and making money, definitely like and subscribe. I make this video every single day that the markets are open and Sunday, so make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Welcome to the Portfolio Bulletin. Let's get started. So Netflix, they missed on earnings, but they blew away estimates on subscribers. It's kind of interesting. They did open up their new ad tier, so you should expect some new subscribers to be coming in. But the big thing here for me is earnings per share missed by a lot. 12 cents per share versus the 45 cents per share, which was already down quite a bit from their previous quarter. I'm not sure why there's so much joy here. So global paid subscribers, 7,066,000 added compared to the 4.57 million expected. I guess what they're hoping is that there's doing a lot of spending right now and that this is just suppressed earnings and that over time, these global subscribers, these new ads are going to pay and that'll bring up earnings in the future. But right now, this just does not look that crazy good to me. I think the fact that they didn't miss horribly on subscribers is probably propping it up. They did really well last quarter and they had been struggling the quarters previous to last quarter. So another big increase in subscribers, interesting. We'll have to see how that turns into top and bottom line in the quarters to come. He also mentioned that last quarter they were very optimistic about the advertising business that they recently added, and that seems to be paying off in terms of subscribers. They also mentioned here going forward, Netflix will no longer give subscriber guidance. However, it will still report those numbers. This is probably a good decision in my opinion. Seems like people focus on the subscribers quite a bit and whether they are above or below estimates. And the stock seems to move a lot on that guidance and actual subscriber growth versus earnings and potential growth of top and bottom line. And that's kind of what we talked about before. Otherwise, revenue right at expectations, earnings struggled, but the stock did pop up a little bit, and that will affect at least the NASDAQ going into tomorrow, maybe a little bit. Moving over to the charts here on the hour and the 4 hour. Interesting developments on momentum. Momentum to the downside on the hourly chart fell throughout the session after the gap down. So we gapped down, got into the zone. We touched the 200 SMA on the hourly chart, which acted as support throughout the day, could not get back below that. We were oversold on the hourly after the gap down. If you look here, you can actually see slight divergence on the RSI. So that initial candle, the 6 o'clock candle, was the low of RSI. Came down, tested the 200 SMA, giving you that potential for a bullish trade counter trend. Don't like counter trend rallies that much. Usually they don't follow through that strongly. This one turned out to be fairly good with 3 hours of upward price action. You kind of could have expected that since we did gap down. Usually those gaps get filled. We didn't quite get there, so there is a slight gap. Couldn't quite fill it. I don't know if that means we're going to come up and fill it tomorrow. Definitely curious. RSI ticking to the upside here. Momentum on the 4 hour actually ticked down on the 11 o'clock and 1500 candles, so that's interesting as well. It's worth noting that the 200 SMA on the 4 hour is still moving up. It has not accounted for this down move quite yet, so that's interesting as well. Looking over at the daily chart, though, you can see big steps down. Even if we do get a little bit of a retrace, you would expect that this momentum is going to carry through. These are very big, consistent steps down. Cross the 50 on the daily chart on the RSI, so again, expecting that this is going to continue. Could get a short-term retrace, could fill that gap, hit gap resistance, and then sell off. Certainly a possibility, but longer-term momentum is still pointing to the downside, even if the short-term on the hourly is pointing up slightly. Moving over to the 15 and the 1 hour, I do want to do a little bit smaller time frame analysis for you guys, just to help with a little bit more of the trading aspect of investing. That's what we do on this channel a little bit more. So looking at that 15-minute, you can see momentum was really choppy through the early part of the session. And then we got some really consistent steps up. This was a solid trade to the upside. And then as soon as we got that break here on the 1345 candle, we got the engulfing candle on the 15-minute, step down in momentum, and then we sold off really consistently. Another good trade here. So 2 solid trades on the day. If you made some money in here, congratulations. Might have been a little bit of luck. This is tough to trade. You definitely could have looked at RSI being oversold and looked for the gap fill. Didn't get the gap fill, so that was a bit of a fake out. Tough to trade there. Otherwise, looking at the hour, you can see same thing, momentum ticking to the upside, RSI ticking a little bit stronger here. Interesting, worth paying attention to. Jumping up to the 1 day though, same story. We have momentum ticking to the downside. You would expect this to continue. We do want to start talking about max pain here. So max pain for tomorrow for options is at 275. There are a lot of options sitting at 270. I don't think we'll get below that tomorrow, even if we sell off pretty aggressively. And I would expect that we'll end up between 274 to 276 at some point tomorrow at the close. Moving over to the Dow and the Russell on the 4-hour, you can see the Dow looked very weak today, threw a couple of pins to the upside, but really faded throughout the session. Not a lot to add there. Similarly on the Russell, still showing quite a bit of strength. You can see it's still above the 200 SMA on the 4-hour chart. Otherwise, followed the same pattern, fell into the open, rallied into the midday, and then fell into the end of the day. Not a lot of information here, except for the fact that the Russell is still strong and the Dow is now showing weakness well below the 200 SMA on the 4-hour chart. Moving over to Netflix on the hour and the 4-hour. Like we talked about, they crushed subscriber growth, did not do well on earnings. They were good on revenue though, so they did spike up quite a lot, all the way up to 344. Obviously, that did not hold. Usually you see a big spike like that, it's not going to hold the entire move unless they really, really crushed earnings. Maybe if their actual earnings was higher than expected, along with revenue and subscribers, they could have gone higher and held. But right now, we're kind of in that same range. They fell throughout the day. You could use this as a gap fill. And then I would expect the normal trend to continue. If markets go down tomorrow, you would expect Netflix to follow along with it. Netflix does make up more than 1% of the NASDAQ, so it's worth paying attention to here. Maybe they get a little bit of follow through and that props up markets just a little bit tomorrow. Definitely something to keep in mind. Moving over to Apple and Tesla. Apple showing quite a bit of strength, honestly. Filled the gaps, looked really good throughout the day. Did get all the way up to the 144 EMA. Could not break it, did sell off from there. So on the 4-hour, did look a little bit weak into the close, but momentum is still building to the upside here. We did get a bounce off the 50 RSI on the 4-hour. So a little bit of strength there. I do want to look at this here on the 1-hour just to see what that looks like. Yeah, so momentum building throughout the session. Did turn slightly green here in the after hours, something worth paying attention to. If Apple shows some strength into tomorrow, again, the biggest stock in the world could certainly push markets around. And this really does look quite strong compared to what we saw on the major indices. Otherwise, moving over to Tesla, you can see filled the gap on the wick, went sideways pretty much throughout the day, did not get any weakening momentum on the 4-hour, so still looks negative. You would expect this to continue. Let's reset this price scale. You would expect this to continue, although it's worth noting these steps are pretty minor, not consistent big steps like you see here. So maybe this flattens out, you get 1 or 2 weakening steps, and then we get a continuation. Definitely seen some strength here in Tesla recently, and this trend seems to be still intact, and we have not tested resistance yet. Moving over to IYT, Transportation ETF. Looking at the hourly, couldn't fill the gap, so we gapped down, same as the major indices here. Couldn't fill the gap, again, showing weakness. Definitely looks weak on the hourly, although momentum is slightly building here on the hour. Definitely something to pay attention to. Looking at the daily chart though, same thing, gap down, left a gap quite a bit, and then momentum here looking quite weak. You would expect it to come down at least into this 221 zone, maybe down to 220 after the big rally that we had. If we do get below the 200 SMA on the daily chart, that's going to be a big development, right? So we came in and tested it here. You can see came down to that 224.69 area. And then we rejected from that point into the midday. You can see what that looked like here. Came down, tested, rejected. And then if we get that bigger push down tomorrow through the 200, that's definitely going to be a pretty bearish development. And that should be pointing to lower prices across all the major indices. Moving over to semiconductors here, looking extremely weak. You can look at daily chart. Big down day yesterday. Gap and then fell throughout the session, barely even attempted to fill the gap. So this looks really bearish here. You would expect this to continue down to the 212 level. That would be a pretty big cover for tomorrow. But for today, we did go down a little bit more than $5 at one point. So $5 from today, if we continue this trend, get back down to this next level of support down at 215, 216, certainly possible. This looks weak and you would expect this to continue. And then, of course, we do have this gap back here from about 211 up to 215. So expect we get some support at gap support. And then I expect that to fill within the next few days, within the first few days of next week. Moving over to consumer staples versus consumer discretionary here on the left and the right. Consumer staples actually showed a little bit of strength, did fill the gap just momentarily before selling off throughout the session on the 4-hour. Consumer discretionary, however, looked extremely weak. Barely attempted to fill and then fell throughout the session. Momentum looking very weak here. Consistent steps down, and that trend continues here into bearish momentum. Cross the 50 level on RSI. Maybe we get a slight retest, slight push up here. This looks very weak. You would expect this to continue. Same thing here on consumer staples. We finally got into that price target of $72. We've been expecting that for a long time. I actually thought we would get it sooner, but we did kind of stall out in this 75 range, but we did get there. And at this point, it doesn't seem like it's holding up at this point. We did not get into oversold territory on the RSI, and I wouldn't expect any kind of major bounce here until we get into that oversold condition, probably tomorrow if I had to guess. Moving over to the 10-year and the 2-year yield, I've been including this a little bit more here because it does seem to be pushing the markets around a little bit more recently. You can see we've been falling here pretty consistently on both of these for a while. And then I thought we broke out, did not happen, broke back down, made new lows here. And then we pushed back up to resistance here on the 2 years. So interesting, interacted with that, broke down slightly. But if we do see a breakout here tomorrow, that would be a pretty good indicator that we might be moving lower. Definitely something to watch out for. The 10-year actually showing a little bit more strength. We did break below that resistance line, similar to the 2-year, but we got above it here, retested just for a moment, and then stayed above it. Does seem like we have a little bit of support at that 339 level. Definitely would like to see this perk up. It's worth noting that momentum on the hourly is fading here slightly, so maybe we get a slight retrace overnight, and then we see a bigger push into tomorrow. That does happen. You should expect equities and specifically growth in tech to move down more aggressively. But right now, definitely seems like we're getting a little bit of an upswing in yields, which obviously is bad for growth. Moving over to the DXY, the dollar continues to do not much of anything. The 102 level continues to hold, testing it once again here in the last few hours. At this point, it looks like distribution, right? So it looks like a little bit of an accumulation type period. And if this does continue to hold and RSI continues to maintain where it's at and ticking actually slightly higher here, you can see currently sitting slightly higher on the 4-hour RSI. Can't get above that 50 level quite yet on the 4-hour. You would like to see it hold above the 50 level. If we are going to make a breakout to the upside, let's extend this trend line here a little bit. Seems like we're going to continue to interact with that level. So I'd like to see this break out. Obviously, that would be bad for equities, and I am short the market right now. Momentum is slightly to the downside. This is pretty weak momentum, honestly, here on the hourly, so not much to say there. Fairly consistent steps to the downside on the 4-hour, but really this is sideways price action at this point, and you really would like to see it break to the upside. Honestly, tomorrow, maybe the next few days. Moving over to JNK, not a lot to add here on the hour or the 4-hour. Gap down, fell throughout the session, slight bounce on the 1300 candle, and then quickly retraced all of that in the 1400 candle. So looks very weak, sitting right on the 21 EMA on the 4-hour chart. That's the current support sitting at $93. If we do get below that tomorrow, you should expect it to go quite a ways. No support here until we fill the gap down at $92.75. I would look for some support. That's around $1 of downside from where we are right now. And if this trend continues here on the 4-hour, that's obviously going to continue to lead the markets in my opinion. And that momentum to the downside is quite strong, consistent steps down, and that continues here today on the 4-hour. Moving over to TLT on the hour and the 4-hour. Man, TLT doesn't know what it's doing. So gap down, kind of fell throughout the session, found a little bit of support into the midday. Basically didn't move after the gap down, but that was after a gap up. We didn't fill the gap or anything, so interesting here. Definitely still in a bullish structure. You can see the 4-hour still doing well. It's not going to be a breakdown until we get below this about 107.50 area. And I don't expect that to happen. I think this is going to continue to go higher. Looks like we're going to get up here and retest this last high that we had. And honestly, I would expect it to break out. I do think TLT is going to do quite well over the next few months. And right now, the structure is still intact to the upside. Moving over to the VIX, basically did exactly what we thought. We were getting some bullish momentum, got the continuation, hit resistance, and fell from there. Hopefully we find some support right where we are, and we rally back up to these areas, maybe all the way up to 2250, 2230 in that area. That would be great. Right now, this is a bullish structure. It seems to be doing well. Slight bearish momentum right here. Hopefully we get a bounce off of that 50 level. Markets did sell off into the close a little bit, so that should be good for the VIX. And as long as this continues to remain in a bullish pattern, that should be bad for stocks and good for me as a short trader. Moving over to my accounts, you can see I made a little bit of money on the day, not too bad. Shows 368, but actual gains I think were like 330 or 335. We'll see how that plays out. I do have some calls at 276. They're in a profit right now, but after hours, it's perking up a little bit. Honestly, I would prefer to not get those shares. I already have 200 covered puts here, so 200 short shares with a short put at 275 with a credit of $1.40. So it does cover some of my losses if the market does go up a little bit tomorrow. I don't think that's going to happen. I do think we're going to continue in the bearish pattern, especially after the retrace that we got today helped cancel out some of that momentum. We should get a reinitiation to the downside, in my opinion. I do have some 267 calls for tomorrow as well. Small profit there already. So really, I don't want these extra shares. I already have 200, and I would like to stay pretty much where I'm at with my short covered puts and my short calls here. Let me know down in the comment section what you think the market is going to do tomorrow. What did you think of Netflix? Are they going to rally tomorrow, or is this just a short-term perk and then we're going to continue to sell off like we were into the midday? Definitely comment any charts you would like me to cover in the video for tomorrow. Definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video. I make this video every single day that the markets are open as well as Sundays, so definitely hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.